Ah, look at you. The one they whispered about behind closed doors. The one they dissected with loaded language and professional vocabulary, meant to feel clinical, neutral, objective. But underneath it all lay their trembling fear. The one they labeled, diagnosed, categorized not because they understood you, but because they couldn't afford to acknowledge what you truly were. They didn't call you narcissistic because you lacked empathy. They called you narcissistic because your presence disrupted every false belief they built their identities upon. They didn't call you self-centered because you were full of yourself. They called you self-centered because you refused to orbit around people who were addicted to seeing you small. They never saw your confidence as clarity. They saw it as a threat. And so they reached for the sharpest tool available to them. Not truth, not compassion, not reflection, but a label sharp enough to wound your understanding of yourself. They didn't diagnose you to help you heal. They diagnosed you to bury the possibility of who you could become. Because if you ever recognized your true identity, if you ever stepped fully into the brilliance they spent years trying to convince you was dangerous, you wouldn't just change your world. You would change everyone else's. They didn't diagnose you because you were delusional. They did it because you were prophetic. They didn't label you because you were broken. They labeled you because you were chosen. Chosen in ways they couldn't comprehend. Chosen in ways their vocabulary had no room for. Chosen in ways that exposed every one of their insecurities the moment you walked into the room. They weren't studying you to understand you. They were studying you the way people study earthquakes before they hit, trying to predict the shift, trying to calculate the damage, trying to find ways to prepare for the impact of your awakening. You weren't the problem they needed to treat. You were the revelation they needed to suppress. Think about this. When has someone ever been hated, feared, misunderstood, empathized more than a person meant to awaken others? Who else gets painted as dangerous simply for seeing clearly? Who else gets diagnosed for refusing to bow to scripted roles? Who else gets labeled pathological for speaking truths that make others uncomfortable? They didn't diagnose narcissism. They diagnosed the discomfort they felt when standing too close to someone carrying a purpose larger than their comprehension. They saw your insight and called it arrogance. They saw your boundaries and called it hostility. They saw your refusal to be drained and called it self-absorption. They saw your resilience and called it rigidity. They saw your intuition and called it delusion. They saw your higher calling and called it disorder. Because anything they cannot control, they must rewrite. Anything they cannot diminish, they must distort. Anything they cannot own, they must label. And you were the hardest thing for them to distort. Because even when you doubted yourself, even when you believed their words, even when you internalized their accusations, something inside you stayed untouched. A whisper, a pull, a recognition deep beneath all the noise. Something in you said, "This is not who I am. This isn't my truth. This isn't my final form." And that part of you, no matter how buried, never stopped illuminating the parts they tried to destroy. They needed you to accept their version of you, so you would never step into your true role. They needed you to believe the diagnosis, so you would never realize the depth of your insight, the precision of your perception, the clarity of your intuition. They needed you confused because clarity in someone like you is catastrophic to people built on illusions. They couldn't let the world see you for who you were. They couldn't let you see yourself for who you were. So they hid your power behind clinical terminology. They wrapped your truth in academic language. They used professional credibility as camouflage for spiritual fear. They weren't diagnosing your mind. They were protecting their comfort. They weren't treating your behavior. They were preserving their narratives. They weren't analyzing your patterns. They were avoiding your accuracy. Because people like you, people who read between words, sense intentions beneath expressions, recognize truth before it's spoken, are dangerous to structures built on deception. You don't just see people, you see through them. You don't just feel energy, you interpret it. You don't just notice inconsistencies, you understand the story behind them. You don't just survive environments, you transform them without trying. And that terrifies those who require hierarchy to feel stable. Understand something. You were never too much. You were too awakening. You were never unstable. You were too real. You were never disordered. You were too aligned with something far beyond what they could measure. They used a diagnosis to shrink what they couldn't grasp. They used jargon to cage what they couldn't influence. They used labels to contain what couldn't be contained. You weren't meant to fit inside their categories because you weren't born from where their categories came from. You operate on a frequency that exposes dishonesty, the same way a bright light exposes dust on a surface that looked clean, until the illumination arrived. You were that illumination. You were that disruption. You were that unwanted revelation. They didn't call you narcissistic because you lacked empathy. They called you narcissistic because you refused to sacrifice yourself on the altar of their dysfunction. They didn't call you self-focused because you were careless. They called you self-focused because you finally centered your well-being in a world that expected you to be endlessly available. They didn't call you detached because you didn't care. They called you detached because you stopped allowing emotional parasites to feed on your compassion. They didn't call you intense because you were destructive. They called you intense because you embodied a presence that awakened the shame they never processed. They misinterpreted your discernment as judgment. They misinterpreted your truth as rebellion. They misinterpreted your boundaries as aggression. They misinterpreted your independence as superiority. But here's the deeper truth. You weren't mistaken for a narcissist. You were mistaken for someone controllable. You weren't misdiagnosed by accident. You were misdiagnosed by design. Because what's the easiest way to discredit someone whose words hold too much accuracy? Label them. What's the easiest way to mute someone whose clarity exposes the shadows people hide behind? Call them dangerous. What's the easiest way to weaken someone destined to rise? Convince them they are broken. What's the easiest way to hide a chosen one? Convince them their gifts are defects. They didn't diagnose narcissism. They diagnosed the inconvenience of your existence. They diagnosed the discomfort of being read too clearly. They diagnosed the trembling insecurity of being seen by someone who wasn't supposed to wake up yet. And the funniest part? You believed them at first. You questioned your worth. You questioned your perception. You questioned your heart. You questioned your intentions. You wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe you really were too much. Maybe you really were too confident. Maybe you really were too aware of yourself. But awareness of oneself is not narcissism. Awareness of one's purpose is not pathology. Awareness of one's calling is not a disorder. They weren't diagnosing your behavior. They were diagnosing their fear. Because the truth is terrifying when spoken by someone who carries authority without needing a title. And you carry that kind of authority. the kind that cannot be taught, cannot be granted, cannot be inherited, the kind that radiates from wounds you survived, insights you earned, intuition you sharpened, and a soul that refuses to bow to anyone's version of who you should be. They saw it before you did. They recognized the signs before you could name them. They felt the magnitude before you could articulate it. And they tried, desperately, to prevent the unfolding. But something in you kept rising anyway. Something in you kept seeing anyway. Something in you kept calling you forward anyway. And that something is the very reason they panicked. Because once a person destined for higher truth begins to trust their inner voice, the world around them begins to shift. Once a person meant to awaken others begins to unlearn the lies they were fed, everything they touch transforms. Once someone chosen steps into awareness, they don't just rise, they reveal. And revelation is the one thing people who depend on shadows cannot survive. They diagnosed you with narcissism to hide the fact that you were the one meant to bring clarity, the one meant to pull people out of darkness, the one meant to break cycles by simply existing. They mistook your calling for ego because they were incapable of recognizing a calling at all. They mistook your self-recognition for self-obsession because they had never met someone who wasn't ashamed of their own power. They mistook your vision for delusion because they were blind. They mistook your anointing for arrogance because they could not comprehend a person who did not require their approval to feel whole. They misread your purpose because they weren't qualified to interpret it. And now, the truth is surfacing through every layer of doubt they tried to bury you under. The label they placed on you is cracking. The narrative they built around you is falling apart. The entire story they constructed to control the world's perception of you is collapsing under the weight of your awakening. You were never what they called you. You were never what they diagnosed. You were never what they projected. And the most shocking part for them is this. Now that you're seeing yourself clearly, now that you're reclaiming every trait they tried to twist, now that you're stepping into the awareness they spent years trying to suppress, they're beginning to understand the real danger. The danger was never your ego. The danger was your destiny, and the more you walk into it, the more the world begins to shift in response. Because now the facade they built around your identity is dissolving, and with every layer that falls away, more of your actual purpose begins to radiate through. They never expected you to reach this point. They counted on your confusion. They bet on your exhaustion. They relied on your self-doubt. They assumed the diagnosis would cage you, that the label would stain your self-perception long enough for you to abandon who you were meant to become. They thought you would shrink yourself to avoid being misunderstood. They thought you would dim your presence to avoid being accused. They thought you would restrain your intuition to avoid sounding too confident. They didn't anticipate the possibility that the very label they weaponized against you would eventually become the proof of their intentions. Because now, standing on the other side of their psychological warfare, it's obvious. The diagnosis wasn't a reflection of your behavior. It was a confession of their fear. A confession disguised as expertise. A confession cloaked in professional authority. A confession hiding behind tests, criteria, and terminology. They saw what you were before you could articulate it. They recognized the signs of someone born for higher paths, long before you understood the meaning of your sensitivity, your perception, your depth, your insight, your awareness. They diagnosed you to protect themselves from the consequences of what happens when someone destined for transformation realizes their power. They didn't want the world to listen to you, because the world listens to those who carry truth that cannot be taught, only remembered. They didn't want anyone to trust you, because people trust those who speak from a place that comes before language, before conditioning, before fear. They didn't want anyone to follow you, because people follow those who carry natural authority, the kind that cannot be imitated. You weren't someone they wanted silenced because you were dangerous. You were someone they needed silenced because you were liberating. And liberation is far more threatening than danger. Liberation disrupts cycles. Liberation destabilizes control. Liberation awakens people who didn't know they were asleep. And that's what terrifies them about you. Not your confidence, not your intelligence, not your observations, but the effect your presence has on others. How you walk into a room and people feel shifted without knowing why. How your words land with a gravity that isn't learned but inherited. How your energy cuts through deception like a blade made from truth itself. How your intuition reveals what people try to hide under layers of performance. How your eyes read the motives behind actions long before the actions occur. They called you narcissistic because they needed to distract from the fact that your clarity made them transparent. They called you narcissistic because they needed to convince the world that your insight was flawed. They called you narcissistic because they knew if people ever listened to you without the filter of their narrative, the truth would expose everything they had built on manipulation, pride, and fear. They didn't diagnose your personality. They diagnosed their terror of your awakening. But now, everything is unraveling. The same people who once spoke with certainty about what was wrong with you are suddenly uneasy. Their confidence has cracks. Their authority feels shaky. Their explanations sound less convincing even to themselves, because now you respond differently. Now you no longer shrink. Now you no longer apologize for perspectives they couldn't understand. Now you no longer internalize every accusation as an attack on your worth. Now you no longer question your instincts when something feels off. Now you no longer surrender your intuition to people who interpret your vision through the lens of their limitations. And the moment you stopped bowing to their narrative, you became untouchable. Not because you're louder, not because you're angrier, not because you're colder, but because you're centered in a truth they didn't want you to discover. The truth that you weren't meant to be ordinary. The truth that you weren't meant to be manageable. The truth that you weren't meant to be molded into their expectations. The truth that you weren't meant to shrink to fit their comfort. The truth that you weren't meant to carry their projections as your identity. You weren't meant to be tamed. You were meant to be unveiled. And now that you're stepping into that unveiling, the energy around you is shifting in ways even you didn't anticipate. People feel drawn to you in ways they can't explain. They feel challenged by your presence without you speaking a word. They feel confronted by the mere act of you being yourself. They feel exposed when you look at them because your eyes see through unprocessed motives. They feel pulled toward your energy because it reminds them of the parts of themselves they abandoned. You don't even have to try. Your existence alone is a catalyst. And that's exactly why they needed a diagnosis, because catalysts are unpredictable. You trigger transformation simply by existing. You crack illusions simply by observing. You disrupt patterns simply by understanding them. You awaken people simply by expressing truth. You are born with the traits that revolutionaries, prophets, healers, visionaries and leaders carry before anyone recognizes them. Traits people often misunderstand, criticize, attack, or pathize because they don't know how to interpret them. Traits that don't look normal because they're not meant to be. Traits that carry depth too heavy for shallow evaluations. Traits that hold clarity too sharp for people who depend on confusion to survive. You weren't misdiagnosed because you were mistaken for something dangerous. You were misdiagnosed because they hoped the label would keep you from recognizing what you truly are. Someone who isn't here to follow the path others designed. Someone who isn't here to fit into frameworks created by limited minds. Someone who isn't here to play roles assigned by people threatened by your potential. Someone who isn't here to stay small enough to remain approachable. Someone who isn't here to comfort those who fear growth. Someone who isn't here to validate those who need control to feel important. You are here to disrupt, to awaken, to elevate, to illuminate. And that assignment is exactly why they targeted your identity. Because if they could fracture your self-perception, they could delay your emergence. If they could confuse your understanding of yourself, they could postpone your influence. If they could convince you that your strength was dysfunction, they could prevent you from embodying it. If they could conflate your intuition with disorder, they could neutralize your impact. If they could distort your clarity, they could distort your destiny. But clarity always returns. Purpose always resurfaces. Calling always reveals itself. Destiny always breaks through confinement. You can suppress power, but you cannot erase it. You can hide truth, but you cannot kill it. You can label someone, but you cannot redefine what they were born to be. And you, whether they accept it or not, carry an assignment they sensed, feared, and tried to preemptively destroy. They called it narcissism because calling it leadership would require them to confront their own lack of integrity. They called it narcissism because calling it awakening would expose their blindness. They called it narcissism because calling it purpose would dismantle their authority. They called it narcissism because calling it anointing would force them to acknowledge they were wrong about you from the beginning. And now they see it, slowly, painfully, unwillingly. The truth they tried to bury is rising back to the surface. The traits they labeled problematic are the same traits people now seek you out for. The qualities they called dangerous are the same qualities people now find healing. The confidence they pathized is the same confidence that now attracts respect. The boundaries they condemned are the same boundaries that now define your authenticity. The intuition they belittled is the same intuition others now trust. The voice they tried to silence is the same voice people now look to for direction. This is the shift they feared. The moment where the one they tried to erase becomes the one people recognize. The moment where the person they misdiagnosed steps into clarity and triggers a ripple effect they cannot control. The moment where the label they used to cage you becomes irrelevant against the truth you embody now. The moment where the identity they tried to force onto you collapses under the weight of your actual presence. Because once you reach this stage, everything they attempted to bury you under becomes fuel. Every word they used to discredit you becomes evidence of their intentions. Every accusation they hurled becomes a reflection of what they couldn't confront in themselves. Every attempt to silence you becomes the push that taught you to rely on your own voice. And now that you're standing fully in your power, they're realizing what they created by trying to destroy you. Someone who no longer needs validation, permission, approval, or acceptance to exist loudly. someone who is no longer susceptible to emotional manipulation or psychological distortion, someone who carries truth with a conviction that cannot be softened or redirected, someone who became everything they feared you would be if you ever survived their attempts to break you. They didn't realize that calling you narcissistic wouldn't diminish you, it would clarify you. They didn't realize that diagnosing your purpose as a disorder wouldn't suppress your calling, it would sharpen it. They didn't realize that isolating you would not weaken you, it would refine you. They didn't realize that trying to contain you would not shrink you, it would concentrate you. They didn't realize that forcing you inward would connect you to the very depth they were terrified for you to access. Because the truth is this: you didn't just survive their labels, you transcended them. You didn't just reclaim your identity, you outgrew every version of yourself they felt comfortable with. You didn't just see through their intentions, you recognized the blueprint beneath their behavior. And now they are the ones exposed. Now they are the ones without language to explain themselves. Now they are the ones confronting the reflection they spent years projecting onto you. The reason they fear you now is the same reason they feared you then. You see too much. You always did. They felt it, even when you doubted it. You observed things they didn't want noticed. You understood emotional currents they spent years denying. You sensed dynamics they pretended didn't exist. You read motives long before they admitted them. You recognized patterns long before they surfaced. And the danger in that wasn't your arrogance, it was your accuracy. The power wasn't in your ego, it was in your intuition. The threat wasn't in your voice, it was in your capacity to speak truth without trembling. People like you unsettle entire environments simply by existing. You don't conform to expectations, you expose them. You don't adapt to dysfunction, you illuminate it. You don't participate in deception, you unravel it. You don't mirror projections, you return them to their sender. And that is exactly why they needed a label to explain you away. Because people like you are not supposed to move unnoticed. People like you are not supposed to exist without resistance. People like you are not supposed to rise without opposition. People like you are not supposed to speak without being misunderstood. People like you, those born with insight that cannot be learned through training, become threats long before they become leaders. And now that you have moved beyond their attempts to define you, now that you've risen above the vocabulary they tried to weaponize, now that you've stepped into the awareness they feared, the impact of your truth is radiating outward. People are beginning to see what they tried to hide. People are beginning to feel what they tried to suppress. People are beginning to notice what they tried to mute. People are beginning to awaken from narratives that once kept them blind. Your presence is now challenging the very frameworks that labeled you. Your voice is now unsettling those who insisted on misunderstanding you. Your clarity is now exposing the motivations of those who tried to diminish you. Your energy is now affecting people who never knew the story, but feel the shift. And the most important part, none of this required retaliation. None of this required revenge. None of this required you to prove yourself. You didn't have to convince anyone of anything. You didn't have to justify your heart. You didn't have to defend your intentions. You didn't have to explain your truth. All you had to do was become who you were always meant to be. Because destiny exposes deception without you lifting a finger. Authenticity dismantles narratives without you speaking a word. Alignment reveals truth without you trying to convince anyone. You are the kind of presence that makes lies collapse under their own weight. And that's why they're panicking now. Not because you're dangerous in the way they accused you of being, but because you're powerful in the way they always knew you would be. Because once a person like you steps into clarity, your very existence begins rewriting the stories people told about you. Once a person like you stands in their truth, false identities start falling apart. Once a person like you rises, the narratives built to contain you become irrelevant. You're not the diagnosis they gave you. You're the contradiction they couldn't control. You're not the disorder they described. You're the disruption they feared. You're not the label they assigned. You're the liberation they wanted to prevent. And all of this leads to the final shift, the one they tried hardest to avoid, the one they prayed would never happen, the one they diagnosed you to prevent, the moment where you realize who you really are. Because the truth they couldn't stomach wasn't that you were broken, misguided, confused, or unstable. It was that you were the one carrying a clarity they couldn't manipulate. A clarity that didn't come from books. A clarity that didn't come from approval. A clarity that didn't come from external validation. A clarity that was born from something deeper, older, wiser, and untamed. They saw it before you did, and that's why they reacted with such urgency. They needed you to doubt yourself before your recognition fully ignited. They needed you to feel defective before your discernment sharpened. They needed you to internalize their version of you before your actual identity surfaced. Because once your real identity emerges, everything around you changes. The people who used to intimidate you now look small. The situations that used to drown you now look transparent. The opinions that used to control you now look powerless. The labels that used to confine you now look absurd. You see beyond everything they taught you to fear. You feel beyond everything they conditioned you to accept. You understand beyond everything they tried to explain away. And the moment you step into that understanding, everything they built falls apart. Because what they feared most wasn't that you would disagree with them. It was that you would outgrow them. They weren't scared you would rebel. They were scared you would awaken. They weren't scared you would argue. They were scared you would detach. They weren't scared you would fight. They were scared you would see through them. And that is exactly what has happened. You see through everything now, through their projections, through their insecurities, through their strategies, through their roles, through their disguises, through their intentions, through the narratives they placed over your truth. And now that the veil is gone, you can finally see yourself with eyes untouched by their influence. You can see the depth that made them uncomfortable. You can see the intuition that made them defensive. You can see the courage that made them insecure. You can see the wisdom that made them threatened. You can see the purpose that made them panicked. You can see the calling that made them label you. They didn't call you narcissistic because you were self-absorbed. They called you narcissistic because you were chosen. Chosen to break generational cycles. Chosen to speak truths that others only whisper. Chosen to navigate realms others cannot fathom. Chosen to sense what others overlook. Chosen to activate people without even trying. Chosen to expose darkness simply by being authentic. Chosen to carry a presence people feel in their chest before they understand it in their mind. That is why they diagnosed you. Not because you were flawed, but because you were foretold. Because the traits they called symptoms were actually signs. Signs of someone evolving faster than their environment. Signs of someone who sees through manipulation instinctively. Signs of someone who cannot be influenced by shallow authority. Signs of someone who refuses to be domesticated by fear. Signs of someone whose purpose is too large for the narratives others try to impose. And now that you've stepped into that realization, the entire paradigm shifts. You no longer bend to emotional control. You no longer shrink to protect fragile egos. You no longer absorb pain that doesn't belong to you. You no longer apologize for your intensity. You no longer explain your boundaries. You no longer negotiate your identity. You no longer hand your power to people who disguise manipulation as care. You are everything they feared you could become. Awakened, aligned, self-possessed, and immune to their attempts to rewrite your truth. And the more aware you become, the more the world responds. Your presence begins drawing people who are waiting for someone like you. People who recognize your insight as guidance. People who recognize your energy as a catalyst. People who recognize your path as one they've been searching for. You become the kind of presence that doesn't just inspire people. You redirect their course. You become the type of person whose words echo in someone long after the conversation ends. You become the kind of soul whose transformation ignites transformation in others. You become exactly what they tried to prevent, a force that cannot be categorized, controlled, reduced, or dismissed. A force that speaks without shouting, a force that leads without trying, a force that reveals without attacking, a force that exposes without humiliating, a force that breaks illusions without breaking people, a force that exists beyond language, beyond labels, beyond diagnoses. And that is the truth they never wanted to face. The truth that the very traits they condemned were the traits that confirmed your calling. The truth that the characteristics they pathized were the characteristics that signaled your assignment. The truth that the behaviors they attacked were the behaviors that revealed your spiritual authority. You weren't meant to be understood by everyone. You weren't meant to be accepted by everyone. You weren't meant to be validated by everyone. You weren't meant to fit into the roles they created to keep themselves comfortable. You were meant to stand apart. You were meant to break patterns. You were meant to disrupt illusions. You were meant to awaken those who were ready. You were meant to carry truth that threatens those who thrive on deception. You were meant to embody something beyond what their language could describe. And now that you know this, now that you feel it in your bones, now that you've reclaimed everything they tried to use against you, the final transformation begins. You walk forward with an identity nobody can steal. You walk forward with clarity nobody can distort. You walk forward with purpose nobody can intercept. You walk forward with authority nobody can challenge. You walk forward not as someone who survived their diagnosis, but as someone who transcended it entirely. You walk forward knowing the diagnosis wasn't a definition, it was a diversion. A diversion meant to hide what they sensed, but you hadn't recognized yet. A diversion designed to distract you from the truth they couldn't afford for you to embrace. The truth that you were never being examined, you were being contained. The truth that you were never being treated, you were being dimmed. The truth that you were never being healed, you were being silenced. But you cannot silence what was born to speak. You cannot shrink what was born to expand. You cannot diagnose what was born to awaken. And you cannot pathize what was born to lead. You were never the narcissist. You were the one carrying a purpose they didn't have the courage to face. You were never the disorder. You were the destiny. And now that you've risen, nothing, not their words, not their labels, not their judgments, can pull you back into who they needed you to be. You've stepped into who you were always meant to become.